Tutorials. They are one of the most important aspects of any game. The first few minutes of a tutorial can either make or break a game for a player. The best tutorials are ones the player does not even realize are there. They are integrated seamlessly through gameplay, almost fully diegetic, and are fully engaging like the rest of the game. Each game uses different techniques of tutorialization to educate players about the rules and mechanics of the game. I believe some of these techniques excel at teaching players better than other techniques. Doom ain't one of those techniques, Chief. Teaching using a carefully designed experience is one of the most crucial ways of teaching a tutorial diegetically. According to Michael Green, this technique is about carefully placing various elements together to create a learning experience. The most evident and iconic use of this type of tutorialization is Super Mario Bros. Level 1-1. Within the first 8 seconds of the game, it teaches you where to move, how to jump, what an enemy is, what power-ups do, and how objects interact with each other, all within the first 8 seconds of the game. But Lucas, I hear you cry. What does a platformer have to do with Doom's? Well, let's analyze a game in the same genre that uses the same technique. Half-Life 2's gravity gun is an iconic part of the game, and its tutorialization is amazing. When we first acquire the gun, we get a safe space to play catch with dog. This tutorializes the basics of the gun diegetically without taking the player out of the world. After a raid, we're forced to enter the abandoned town of Ravenholm, where we are taught how to use the gravity gun as a weapon. When we enter the upcoming building, we can see a lot of sharp saw blades and explosive canisters. We even see a saw blade stuck in the wall that is splitting a zombie in half. The game is strongly hinting to the player how to use the gravity gun in combat. To solidify this learning experience, the doorway to proceed is blocked by saw blades. In order to get through, the player needs to take them off from the doorway. The moment they do, a zombie walks by. This indicates to the player to shoot the zombie with the saw blade they are holding. With a game of catch and perfectly timed zombies, the player has learned everything they need to know in regards to the gravity gun, all without saying a word or taking the player out of immersion. Giving the player room to experiment for their own is a great way of teaching players the game's rules without the tutorial feeling condescending. This is only possible through in-game diegetic learning. Context sensitivity is whether or not the game's tutorial is written or in-game. It is widely considered that less text is better. Text often bores players and zaps the immersion straight out of them. The Portal series has stunningly amazing in-game tutorials. For the most part, the tutorials is the game. They make up the majority of the game experience and no one even notices them. That's how good they are. Let's take the level Crazy Box from Portal 2, a late game tutorial that teaches how objects interact with gels. Here we see bounce gel, cleansing gel, a button, and a cube trapped in a glass cage. Each of these elements have been tutorialized before, however, cube interaction with the gels have never been taught prior to this level. With cleverly placed environmental clues, the game tells the player to place a portal above the cage. The player is free to experiment from here using the tools offered to them. Through experimentation, the player will place bounce gel into the cage. This teaches the player two things. One, that gels also interact with objects, not just the player. And two, blue gel makes objects go boing boing. The cube proceeds to bounce all over the room. Using the player's newfound knowledge that gels interact with objects, and by process of elimination, the player will use the other gel in the room that hasn't been used yet, the cleansing gel. This teaches the player that cleansing gel will get rid of other gels on objects. Giving players freedom to experiment with the tutorial rather than forcing the player to do a specific action increases player interaction and attention. This actively makes the player a part of the learning experience rather than mindlessly clicking through a tutorial prompt. Non-diegetic, written tutorials are passive and non-retentive ways of learning. Contrast that to Portal's diegetic, in-game tutorial, which is an active and retentive way of learning. And finally, the most important takeaway I found while researching is most likely the biggest benefit to diegetic tutorials. The last thing you want a player to be feeling during your game is boredom. So why should a game's tutorial be any different? Tutorials should be just as engaging as the rest of the game. Putting heaps of text, pausing the game, or having big glowing arrows telling players where to go is one of the worst ways to teach players, as they won't retain any of it. Actively making your tutorial a part of the game experience will make players be an active part of the learning experience, making them able to retain more information, and, most importantly, they won't even realize they've been learning this entire time.